Good evening and welcome to, what do we call it? A JLI Evening for Optimism. The JLI's course titled This Can Happen. As we know, this is a standalone class, and we're going to discuss a general idea of the Jewish belief in the end of the days, the Jewish belief in a Messiah, in a Mashiach. Now, before we get there, I want to welcome everyone. I believe everyone here was at a previous JLI class. We're not new to JLI, besides one, I'm sorry. So I do want to welcome Stephanie, who's a first-time JLIer, as we call her. So welcome. And together with Stephanie, round of applause, of course. And together with Stephanie, I want to welcome Rachel and Dan and Renee and Eric and Gail and Marty and Bridget and Chayamushka and Lynn and Kathleen and Anne and Franny and Mike and Janet and Cece. Thank you. Welcome. And for all those who will I practiced that for a few days. I was working on it. And all those who may be watching the recording later on, welcome. And I do want to give a special thank you to my wife, Chayamushka. Thank you for putting together this wonderful, wonderful dinner. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so let's get right into it. As we like to do with JLI, I like to talk, but I also like to hear your voices, which means I like discussion. So if you have any comments, any questions, any rebuttals, as long as you don't throw eggs at me, anything besides that, I'm game, okay? So once upon a time, many, many years ago, in a small town in Europe, Yankel comes home and tells his wife, Yentl, says, Yentl, you don't believe what I just heard in the synagogue. We heard that we have to believe in a Mashiach, in a redemption. We're going to be redeemed from Shtetl town in Europe. We're going to Israel. We're going to Jerusalem. Messiah is coming. And she's saying, what are you talking about? I'm fine the way I am. We have a cow that gives milk. We have the chicken that gives eggs. We have our little farm. We're okay over here. Who wants to leave? And he says, no, Yantl, you don't understand. But we have the Kazakhs. The Kazakhs come and they wreak havoc. They kill, they destroy, they torture. We go to Jerusalem, there's no Kazakhs. Yentl says, well, I have a good idea. Let's pray to God that God take the Kazakhs to Jerusalem. Okay. So in Judaism, we know that there are a lot of beliefs. What do we believe in Judaism? If I ask you, what is a Jewish belief? We believe that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. We believe that Israel is a sacred land. We believe that God atones our sins on Yom Kippur. Of course, we believe that chicken soup is healthy and it cures all illnesses, right? We have a lot of beliefs. And then there's Mashiach, the Messiah. Is it a belief? When I ask people, do you believe in Mashiach? Sometimes I'll get, maybe, yeah. Do you believe in his imminent arrival? Nah. I don't know what you're talking about. You may have seen the email I sent out. Was it yesterday or 2 days ago? I lost track of time. And I had a question right at the start of the email. The question was, do you believe in Mashiach? And usually I don't get replies to my emails. Not very, a very low rate reply. But here I got quite a few replies. I got a few replies. Yes, no, maybe so, right? One person writes to me, no, I don't believe in him. And then he explains, he says, his theory is, and not only his theory, I've heard this many, many times throughout the years, that the whole concept of a Messiah, the whole concept of a utopian time, an era where world peace and everything will be nice and dandy, this was something the sages came up with. in order to lift the spirits, the broken spirits of the Jewish people going through all the persecution throughout the ages. So we want them to hope for a better future, for a better tomorrow. So they came up with this concept of Mashiach, the concept of a redemption and return to Israel, but it's not really going to happen. And today, we're happy in New Orleans. We like our jazz. We like our Mardi Gras. We like our food. We like our culture. Who needs to go to Israel? Who needs Mashiach? What is this all about? I'm not even sure what you're talking about. It's foreign to me. It's a foreign concept. And I think many of us, if we're honest with ourselves, this is our relationship with Mashiach. We have this interesting relationship with Mashiach. On the one hand, we want to be a good Jew. So we believe in it. And in fact, next week, for those of you who are staying for next week, we'll see how any one of us who prays the Jewish praise from a prayer book, we're talking about Mashiach time and again. How many of you finished the Seder this year with the proclamation? Next year in Jerusalem, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, right? That's Mashiach. Who's returning to Jerusalem, right? So we'll talk about that next week, where we find this in many, many different areas in life, in Jewish life. So we have this interesting relationship with Mashiach. We believe in it. We're not sure if we believe in it. We're not sure if we want to believe in it. Do we really want him to come? Do we just want Mashiach as a belief, but we don't want it to? We're very confused. And some of us perhaps don't even know what it is. What am I believing in? And what am I not believing in? So that's why I think it's important. And I'm glad that we're all here together, so we can find out a little bit more, what is Mashiach all about? And we can make that objective decision, so to say, what is our relationship with this belief in Mashiach? So you have with you, for those who are here in person, a copy of the first lesson. JLI officially is launching the international class of JLI, which goes on many, many, many different cities. By the way, if you're traveling throughout the 6 weeks and you want to catch a class in a different city, this goes on in many cities. Obviously now with Zoom, so we're not limited to space. But it actually launches next week. So we are a week. We're ahead of the game. So we're going to find out about Mashiach before the rest of the world. So we have here a copy of the PDF. I'm hoping that by next week we'll have the newly designed student books, which God willing, next Tuesday we'll have them. And for those who are joining in Zoom, we'll make sure we get them to you in time for the class. Okay, so the first thing we have to know, and I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully it's going to work this time, even though this morning it did not work. Okay, if you open your textbooks to page 3, we have a quote from Maimonides. Okay, we all know Maimonides. He codified the entire Torah. And he says like this: yes, there are many beliefs in Judaism, but then he gathered together 13 principles of faith. Meaning we believe in many things, but there are 13 most important fundamental beliefs in the Jewish religion. And number 12 reads as follows: I believe with perfect faith in the coming of Mashiach. Although he may tarry, I await his arrival every day. Which is a pretty heavy statement for 2 reasons. First of all, believing in a Mashiach is not just a Jewish belief. My grandmother believes in Mashiach. It's more than that. It's a principle. Keeping Shabbos is not a principle. Fasting on Yom Kippur is not a principle. Eating matzah on Passover is not a principle. Not to say it's not important. Of course, every mitzvah is important. But what is a principle? Only 13 principles. 2 out of the 13 deal with the belief in Mashiach. Number 12 talks about we have to believe that there will be the coming of Mashiach. And second, which is also an important point that the Maimonides tells us, although he may, I await his arrival every day. Okay? This is something that, there's a song, I forget who composed the song, Ani Mamin, Ani Mamin. It's a beautiful song on these words in Hebrew. I believe in the coming of Mashiach. Then, in fact, we are told that many of the Jews, as they were being marched to the gas chambers, were singing the song that they believe in the coming of Mashiach. That paradox, but it's ingrained. It's ingrained in our DNA. So we have many questions when we read this. Many questions come to mind, and many of these questions are going to be answered throughout the 6-week course. Many of it we'll start tonight to deal with some of the questions. Questions like, what will the redemption look like? What's going to happen then? What are the sources in the Torah that tell us what Mashiach is all about? Is it a realistic thing to happen? Is it really possible? Or is it a far-fetched notion? How vital is it to believe it? Is it relevant? And perhaps the most pressing is, do we really need it? As you mentioned earlier, we're doing so well, physically, spiritually. If it's not broken, as you say, don't fix it, right? So do we really need Mashiach? So these are many questions that I think many of us are thinking, and we want to know answers. So let's start with a basic history of Mashiach. Okay, and again, if you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Yes, question, Renee.
Why does it say that we may tarry? Tarry means like come slowly.
Yeah, meaning delay.
Delay. He comes in perfect time. What do you think about tarry?
Great question. I'm going to repeat the question. Renee is asking, what does it mean that Mashiach may tarry? Meaning, whenever the time for him to come, that's the time, right? So he's supposed to come today, and he's not going to come. He'll come tomorrow. But he missed the bus. Like, what's it mean he's coming late? We will discuss that in later classes. What is the right time for Mashiach? Is there more than one right time for Mashiach? It's an interesting discussion that we will hopefully touch upon throughout the next few weeks. But that's a good. Every word is exact and precise. So that is definitely, there's something to that as, in those words of Maimonides. Okay. So, a little history lesson. Jewish people are in Egypt. God takes them out of Egypt. 7 weeks later, they receive the Torah, Mount Sinai. On the Jewish calendar, it's coming up in a few weeks, by the way, the holiday of Shavuos. Jewish people are in the desert for 40 days, for 40 years. All the while they know what's the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is to enter into Israel. Moses is punished. He does not enter the Israel. He passes away in the desert. Joshua brings the Jewish people into Israel. They wage some wars. They conquer the land. During this time, they have a temple, a tabernacle. And it moves locations, different cities throughout Israel. And eventually King David purchases the Temple Mount, which is today in Jerusalem. His son, King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, builds the first temple, the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, the home of God on planet Earth in Jerusalem. When we study the Torah, for those of you who are join our Parsha class on Sunday morning, we see, especially now during the weeks of when we study the book of Leviticus, that the Torah is very much temple oriented. It's all about the temple. We know there are so many mitzvot, and the majority of them have to do either directly with the temple in Jerusalem, the Kohanim who do the service in the temple, or with Israel, the land of Israel. That is the ultimate, the optimal way of serving God is Jewish people in the land of Israel, with their own king, a Jewish king, with their own judges, with their own government, following strict law of the Torah. For many, many hundreds of years, 1,000 plus, I'm not sure the exact amount of years, they were in Israel. The Babylonians come, they destroy the first temple, the Jewish people are exiled. What does it mean exiled? They have to leave Israel and they go to Babylonia. They're there for 70 years. Towards the end of the 70 years, we know the famous story of Purim. Right? Purim, Achashverosh, Haman, right? That whole story happened right towards the end of the 70 years of the Jewish people in exile. Exile means they aren't in their homeland. They don't have a temple. They aren't able to fulfill or do many of the services that they became so used to doing previously. Eventually, the Jewish people, through Ezra, returned to Israel. Not all of the Jewish people, but the Jewish establishment returns to Israel. They build the second temple on the same spot, on the same mountain in Jerusalem. The second temple stands for 420 years, and then the Romans come and destroy the second temple. And again, the Jewish people are exiled, initially from Jerusalem and eventually from Israel. And they end up going to where? The diaspora. So they start spreading out. Initially is also the Middle East, North Africa, Spain, Germany, Western Europe, throughout Russia and Asia, and eventually, obviously, to the United States, throughout the world, we have the Jewish people. So the first exile was about 70 years. The second exile is how long so far? Almost 2,000 years. The second temple was destroyed in roughly year 67 or 70 of the Common Era. So we're almost at 2,000 years. Now, when the Jewish people initially were exiled, they left Israel, imagine how they felt. They have a homeland, and they were exiled. So of course they had a strong yearning to return to Jerusalem, to return to Israel, to rebuild the third temple, right? They have temple 1 destroyed, then they rebuilt it, temple 2 destroyed. Okay, 70 years later, 100 years later, I mean, eventually we're going to return, because that's, as a Jewish people, as a Jewish nation, we need the land of Israel, we need a temple. And that's when the sages enacted so many of different prayers and so many different customs to remind us that this is not where we belong. We belong in Israel. It's 2,000 years, and we're still doing this. It's 2,000 years later, and we're still doing this. Now, although we have a modern state of Israel with a Jewish government for the most part, we're not going to get into that, why that does not fit the bill for a messianic era where it's not just about Jewish government, it's about a government that follows the Torah and God's word, etc., which is a discussion for itself. But the point is like this. The point is like this. When we talk about returning to Israel, we're not just talking about, let's go back to Israel the way we were before. Over here, it's a little tricky. Over here, we have prophets who prophesied before the destruction of the temple. They prophesied that when we will be exiled and then we will return, it's not going to be just as it was, but it's going to be a whole different reality. They gave us a vision, a picture of a utopian world where everything, there's world peace, there's no famine, there's no crime, there's no violence, there's no health issues, no illnesses. It's not just we were in the diaspora and now we return to Israel. But when we return to Israel, it's a whole new reality, both physically and spiritually. Tonight, we're going to focus on the physically. Next week, we'll focus on the spiritual. Okay, so this is the physical, this is the literal yearning or belief in a Mashiach. Mashiach is the person, the anointed one, who is going to usher in this era. It's the era of Mashiach. All Jews throughout the world are going to be gathered, whether they're living in some deserted island in Timbuktu, or if they are here in New Orleans, New York, London, wherever you are, Jewish people return to Israel. This is the belief. And we are united as a nation. And It's a whole different new reality. Okay. I want to read text number 2, and then we'll talk about what do we believe in. But text number 2 on page 4 is also from Maimonides, and this is from Maimonides towards the end of his book of the Mishnah Torah. He talks about what will happen at that point. What's going to happen when Mashiach comes? And he reads as follows. He describes this, and this is based on the prophets. In that era, there will be no famine or war, no envy or competition, for goodness will be in abundance, and all delights will be as commonplace as dust. And if I may add, the quote continues, which is not in the book, that what will be our occupation? What will we occupy ourselves with day in, day out? We're not going to be waging wars. We're not going to be fighting. We're not going to be involved in politics. We'll have everything that we need. Goodness will be in abundance. We'll have everything that we need. We need food. We have everything. What we're going to be doing, really exciting. We're going to be studying Torah all day. You understand why the rabbis want Mashiach, right? The world will be filled with the knowledge of God as the sea, as the water fills the sea. That's what it's going to be. Okay? Now, I want to, for tonight, I want to take belief, emunah in Hebrew, belief, out of the picture for tonight. I don't want us to come to Mashiach and say, you know what, because I'm told that Maimonides tells us that it's a principle in Judaism, I have to believe in Mashiach. I want to be a good Jew. I want to make sure I'm good with God. So I'm going to believe because it's a top-down, because I'm told so, that's why I'm going to believe. I want to take belief out of the picture. And I want to discuss some of the prophecies, things that are going to happen with the coming of Mashiach. And let's take a look at the world around us and say, hey, is this possible? Could this be happening in our day and age? Is it still a fantastical idea, which makes no sense? It's a far-fetched idea that there's not going to be any fighting, no. It's a utopia. It makes no sense, right? Or perhaps it is realistic. Okay. Are you ready? Questions? Yes, Lynn.
This isn't so much a question as it is a concern.
Okay.
I think when you have what you're describing as a messianic age, it's the status quo. If everything is always wonderful, do we appreciate it? Or is it the valleys that lets us see the hills?
Okay.
Do we not take it for granted then, and it's not wonderful?
Lynn,
That's just what's running
Lynn.
through my mind.
You have a very deep mind. I'll tell you why. Because you just said what the sages tell us. The sages tell us that when Mashiach comes, we're going to be in this messianic era, we're going to be jealous of the time of exile. Because when there's exile, there's challenge. And when there's challenge, there's appreciation for what we have. So this is something that, yes, listen, it's you can't have everything, right? You can't have all the money in the world and then also appreciate all the money in the world, which came to you by, right? You can't have everything, right? So yes, there is something to say about exile that at the end of the day, you appreciate what you have. So that's a benefit, but ultimately, what do we want? Do you want my child to appreciate their health because they didn't always have it, or do I want my child to always have their health? You want both.
It's like a different universe. I mean,
But you don't really appreciate your health until you don't have it.
Right.
Not
Yeah.
when you don't.
Right. So that's why the good news is that we are all living now in the Jewish exile. So when we have the Mashiach, God willing, we'll appreciate it, but we didn't always have it. Okay, but point well taken, Lynn. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's look at some of the prophecies, and then let's look at where we are holding today. Text number 3. This is a prophecy from Zechariah in Hebrew, right? On that day, referring to the time of Mashiach, on that day, there will no longer be an impoverished person in the house of God, which means no poor people. Everyone will have what they need. Okay, text 4. God will give rain for your seed with which you shall sow the soil. He will give you plentiful bread, the yield of the land, and the land will be rich and abundant, which means no famine. We'll have all the food that we need. No one will starve to death. No one will starve, period. At that time, Isaiah says in text 5, I'm sorry, text 5 over here. The eyes of the, here he tells us four special prophecies. What's going to be when Mashiach comes regarding our illnesses, our health. At that time, the eyes of the blind will be open. That's A. And the ears of the deaf will be unstopped. That's B. At that time, the lame shall skip like a deer. 3. And the tongue of the mute shall sing. Wow. Sounds fantastical. Text 6 from Isaiah. Nation shall not lift sword against nation, nor shall anyone train for war anymore. No war, only peace. All countries live together in peace. Text 7 is a famous one from Isaiah as well. Nations shall beat their swords into plow blades and their spears into pruning tools. Right? Look at that. Crime. Isaiah says in text 8, no longer will violence be heard in your land, no robbery or devastation within your borders. Wow, it's amazing. In other words, the biblical prophets foresaw a time that all of these problems will be resolved. We have a problem with famine. It hurts us when we see an illness. We have a problem with crime, disease, all these things, right? Don't worry, they're only temporary. They're not here to stay. There's a time that they won't be here anymore. There's a bright future. And Jews throughout the generations believed in this. Throughout their hardships. And take a moment to think how unrealistic this was as Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto are eating their Seder and they're finishing off next year in Jerusalem. That made no sense. Jewish people in Europe talking about no wars, no more killing, no more crime, no more famine. These things made no sense. It was impossible. Going back in the day when the prophecies were actually told to the Jewish people 2,000-3,000 years ago. It was a dream. It wasn't even science fiction. It was just totally radical idea to say that these things are going to happen physically. It means literally. What literally it means that there will be no more wars. Literally it means that the mute will be able to speak and the deaf will be able to hear. Literally, right? So that's why let's take belief out of the picture for a moment. And let's take a moment to think about what's going on. You know, the Rebbe used to tell us in the early 1990s, he used to say like this. Ot is in Yiddish. Anyone here know Yiddish? Any Yiddish speakers? Lynn, you're gonna have to translate for us. Ot kommt Mashiach. Do you know what that means? Mashiach is coming any moment. All you have to do is open up your eyes. He used to repeat this time and again. All you have to do is open up your eyes. What does that mean? We have to open our eyes and see what's going on around us. They did a survey, and you can see the survey on page 12. I'm skipping some of the surveys, a lot of data, a lot of surveys over here, but I'm going to go to page is this? Page 12, figure 1.4. Yeah. And they ask people like this, all things considered, do you think the world is getting better, worse, or neither getting better nor worse? Right? You're living in, I'm not sure when this was taken, 2018 or whatever it was, 2021. Oh, meaning we're not talking about one specific area. Overall. I'm sorry? 2015. Overall, are we getting better, worse, or we're staying the same? Okay. So in this survey, 58% answered it's getting worse. Again, we're not talking about one area, we're talking about overall. 30% say neither worse or better. Okay. So we're talking about, what is that? 78% think that we're not getting better. Only 11% think we're getting better. Now, obviously, we know we're going to get what's our sources for the news, for what's going on. How do I know what's going on in China? How do I know what's going on in Israel, right? We hear the news, whether it's television, whether it's the paper, whether it is whatever, right? What do we see on the news? Do we see that Dan woke up this morning with a smile? We don't see that on the paper. It could have happened yesterday, right? It's not news. It's not exciting. It's not interesting. Unfortunately, when there's a killing, when there's when there's devastation, that's what is in the news. You know the story. There was a Jew in Russia who was reading, I think, what's called the Pravda, the anti-Semitic paper, communist paper. He's sitting in the synagogue and he's reading the paper. Another Jew, Moshe, tells Chaim, this is what you're reading? What is this? We have the Jewish community paper, the bulletin. This is what you should read. You're reading the communist paper? He said, listen, when I read the Jewish paper, what am I hearing about? Beryl lost his job. Yankel has a son who's very ill. This person's cow died. This person needs charity. This person needs help. I get very depressed. I read the Pravda. The Jews own the banks. The Jews are in control. Of course I want to read this. It's good. We read the news, and that is the picture we get. Now, we can't be oblivious to what's happening. There is lots of pain and suffering in the world around us. But we also have to realize that with that, there has been major, major progress overall, the world over, in so many areas, specifically with these prophecies. And the amazing thing about this is, and I'm going to take you off subject for just a moment. There's this idea in Jewish law and Jewish custom. Perhaps you grew up with this as well. On Friday evening, we have a Shabbat dinner. Shabbat dinner, we have fish, we have meat or chicken or salad, whatever we have, right? Now, on Shabbat, we're not supposed to cook. We're supposed to prepare the food for Shabbat before Shabbat. Thursday night, Friday is a busy time in the Jewish home. We're preparing all the food for Shabbat. So the custom is that we're supposed to take a little taste of the food on Friday before Shabbat. Growing up in my house, my mother every week, whether it was winter or summer, depending how we came home, we went to we bathed, we showered before Shabbat. Okay, Mendel, come, here's the piece of chicken and potatoes, right? There's always something to taste the food of Shabbos. And it's explained that there's significance in this. The significance is that we are already tasting Shabbat before Shabbat. So already Friday, we kind of usher in the Shabbat a little bit early, an hour or two early, because we're already tasting the food of Shabbat. Why am I telling you this? Because the same thing applies to the Messianic era. The Messianic era is like Shabbat. It's a holy, it's a new era, it's Shabbat. We are now Friday, we're before Shabbat. But before Shabbat, we already taste the food of Shabbat, which means already now, in a way, we are able to see some signs of Mashiach. Some of these prophecies, we are able to already identify today Has Mashiach come to that yet? Not yet. But we see some of these prophecies already materializing today. And the more I read about this, it really blew my mind. It literally blew my mind because the progress that we see in the world around us, it's not something that took hundreds and hundreds of years. I'm talking about from 30 years ago, 50 years ago to today. I'm not talking about from the dark ages, from 500 years ago to today, from 2,000 years ago to today. I'm talking about from the 1900s, 1800s till today. A major progress in so many areas. So let's start with a few. We'll see how much time we have to go through some examples of these prophecies, and we'll see where we are holding with it today. I want to start with text, with the first prophecy, okay? We can go back quickly to text 3. Text 3 is on, sorry, I'm jumping back and forth over here. Text 3 on page 5. Right, the first prophecy, on that day, there will no longer be an impoverished person in the house of God. Okay, which means basically we are going to eradicate poverty. Okay, where are we holding with poverty today? Do we know poor people? Of course we do. Are the people starving? Yes. Well, let's take a moment to look at the data in regards to poverty today in 2021. Okay, so there's the World Bank. The World Bank defines poverty, extreme poverty, as someone who earns $1.90 or less per day. Okay, I think we can all agree if someone earns $1.90 or less a day, they are in extreme poverty. Obviously, throughout the years, it's adjusted for inflation, but the equivalent to the worth of $1.90 today. Okay, if I ask you, how many people do you think were in extreme poverty in, let's say, 1900 around the world? Let me tell you, it's about 75, 80%. 75 to 80% of people around the world were in extreme poverty 120 years ago. How many people do you think today are in extreme poverty?
90. More, 90.
90%. 90% of people are in extreme poverty, are living
And,
90%.
Are in extreme poverty.
What?
About 30%.
30%. Okay. 70. 50. Anyone want to join on Zoom?
Oh, look at how it's confusing.
Oh, you're cheating. You know what the answer is? Look on page 15, exactly. Page 15 gives you the answer. Today, in 2015, we're talking about less than 10%. I didn't make this up. Less than 10% in 2015. I mean, just, or look at the next page, figure 1.4. You see, in 1985, in 1990, okay, look at this. In 1990, we're talking about 30 years ago. Even I was born. In 1990.
734 million.
We're talking about the number in the last 25 years. We're talking about from 1990 till 2015. In 1990, there were 1.9 billion people living in extreme poverty. 2015, it went down to 735 million. In other words, on average, every day for 25 years, 128,000 fewer people were living in extreme poverty. Imagine that as a headline in the paper. Today, or yesterday, there was 128,000 people, fewer people living in extreme poverty. That's amazing. Now, there are still millions of people in extreme poverty. We still have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do, but take a step back and look at the progress. We're not talking about over hundreds of years. We're not talking about from the year 600 to the year 2000. We're talking about 30 years. What does that mean? What does it mean to the people listening to the prophecy that there will be no poverty? There will be an era where there's no poverty, and people are looking around the world and saying, really? 80% of people are in extreme poverty. What are you talking about? Mr. Zechariah, tell me, are you off your mind? What's going on over here? This is like a fantastical idea that, well, we hope that God will bring us a day that there will be no poverty. What about today? Is it realistic? Could we see ourselves heading in that direction if in 30 years we made so many strides? Look what Bill Gates has to say about this. Of course, you want to hear from Bill Gates. Can't go by talking about poverty without Bill Gates. Talking about page 18, I can't really see over here. Oh, page 18. Text 11. Bill Gates tells us, this huge drop in the number of people living on less than $1.90 per day is among the most underappreciated and most important developments in our generation. Okay, now this is not only in developing countries that have unfortunately, lots of people living in extreme poverty. Think about the U.S. Think about in the U.S. The median income in the U.S. has been steadily rising. Think about what percentage of our income do we spend on food? Okay, so in 1960, was that 60 years ago? In 1960, around an average of 17.5% of our income was spent on food. Okay, in 2019, what percentage of our income do you think we spend on our food? Do you think it's more or less? I think it's more. So again, I'm just reading the data over here. The data says it almost was cut in half. 9.5% of our income. Now, does that mean that we buy less food? No, we buy more food. We all know how our pantries look today and how our parents or our pantries when we were children looked in 1960. We buy more food. The supermarkets are stocked with more quality, more options of food for every different type of food, right? We're buying more, but we're spending less. Because why? Because food is cheaper. They're less expensive. They're not as costly. So we spend 9.5% of our income on average on food. So what are we doing with the rest of our money? We are living more of a luxurious life. Let's be honest with ourselves. Picture our parents' home, our grandparents' home, and picture the way we live, our lifestyle. It's just different. It's a new normal.
We'll have one car.
We have 2 cars, we have smartphones, we have computers, we have air-conditioned houses, we go on vacations, we go out to restaurants, we have a different lifestyle. Thank God. We're happy for it. And we are appreciative of it. I'm not saying we're taking it for granted, we shouldn't take it for granted. But that's progress. I'm sorry?
I would disagree.
Disagree? Okay. I love rebuttals.
My what?
Go ahead.
They love to buy it.
Rebuttal.
Challenge him.
Yes, please. Let's hear it.
That you were giving examples of all physical things, and that, to say that we are better off because we have all materialistic things is not to say we are better off, because spiritually, are we better off?
Great question. Just to repeat. Renee is asking, we're talking about physical luxuries and we're better off physically, materialistically, but what about spiritually? Are we better off spiritually? I'm going to touch upon that in a moment. How we are we'll take a look at how we are spiritually. Great question. The reason why I'm focusing now on physical luxury, not because I think we should all be involved in and we should seek our physical luxury, but because I'm focusing on the prophecy. The prophecy is that there won't be any poverty. Look around the world. We see major progress in the area of poverty. Okay, give you another example. The next text 4, yes.
It's not just that the prophecy is all about the physical stuff. It's about, here's all this physical stuff that'll be taken care of, so you then focus on the spirit.
Good point, Dan. That when we have, Maimonides says that the reason why the Torah promises us that we'll have what we need physically, because then we can focus, we can be relaxed, we don't have to be running around like a chicken without a head, and we're able to focus on our spiritual elements of our lives. That's a good point. Text 4 we read earlier from another prophecy of Isaiah, that there'll be rain and there'll be food in abundance. Okay, food in abundance. How are we doing with that?
It's not food anymore that we're buying in the grocery store. Our dollars are going further and it's more anti-nutrition and junk food and chemicals. And I don't think we're better off, even if we're spending less and our pantries are fuller.
That's a great point, Gail. But Gail's point is that we're buying junk. We're not eating healthy. I fully agree with you, Gail. Fully agree.
I think people are. I think people are. Recently, since the pandemic, people I think are eating healthy.
Point well taken, Gail, that yes, we have to be more cognizant of what we eat, not just how much, the quality of our food, and ultimately it's better for our health, digestive system, et cetera, et cetera. What the prophet is telling us is that people will have food and they won't starve. What was happening back in the day, we all know that there was famine. People didn't have food. My grandparents, during World War II, were in a town in Uzbekistan, I think it was, right? Samarkand. There was literally no food. People were literally dying in the streets. I mean, literally. He described walking down the street, a child is dead, a parent is dead. From what? From starvation. Literally because there was no food available.
But why was that?
Why was that?
Was there a climate issue? Was there drought?
It was during wartime, and they weren't able to transport food, and in general, food was sparse. We didn't have the abundance of food in general as we have today. In 1960, okay,
Well, I'm
again.
sure that there's enough food now in
Oh.
the world, it's just the distribution's not so good.
Oh.
Like, why are there people that are in poverty? Because there are areas where food goes to the garbage, not just from your fridge, like
Right.
from the base, you know.
So to elaborate what Hanushka just mentioned, in 1960, and perhaps some of you remember this, there was a big scare. The scare was there's a population growth. Thanks to my parents, Hanushka's parents, our grandparents, we definitely contributed a lot to this. The population, the population growth. Too many kids, too many people. What happens when you have too many people? We can't feed everyone, right? You go to the supermarket, there's one potato. How many people can eat one potato, right? So you got to have family planning. You have to limit the amount of children. You got to limit the population growth. And it was a real thing. It's a real thing. You go on Google, search it. There's articles in the paper. There are people talking about this on television. This is a real issue, a real problem, a real concern, a scare. What's going to happen? In 1960, how many human beings were walking the planet Earth? Do we know?
2.5 billion.
2.5?
Billion.
Roughly 3 billion. 3 billion people alive in 1960. And we were concerned that if we have 4 billion, 5 billion, God knows what will happen, people will starve to death. In 2020, 2021, how many people are on planet Earth?
7 billion.
Close to 8 billion. We almost tripled. We more than doubled. Do we have food? Anyone 1 second?
Yeah, but we have to burn down forests to make room for planting and grazing.
That, or we have technology. We produce food 1,000 times faster than they did 60 years ago. We have refrigerators, we have airplanes, we have trucks, we have so many ways to transport. Places that there's a drought. Have you ever heard of a famine in California? Every other year there's a drought. What do? They get food from the nearby states and nearby countries, right? It's a non-issue. It's a non-issue. But again, this is only 60 years ago. But of course, when the prophet said this, there will be a time that there will be abundance of food. What were people thinking? Really? Abundance of food? What? In ancient times, there was always famines. Every other season, there's a famine. In Egypt was a famine. In Israel was a famine. Right? It was a common thing because, of course, that's just nature. It doesn't rain for a while. We don't have enough food. You can't just come and take food to feed a whole country within a few weeks. It's not possible. It made no sense. They couldn't fathom it. Where are we today? Now, again, we're not saying there are no people who are starving. We're not saying there aren't people who are hungry, like Chamushka mentioned. We could still make this better, and with the food transportation, we have all the food that goes to waste in one country and other country barely gets anything. I'm not saying we're there. I'm not saying we should lay back on our couch and say, oh, thank God, we're in such a good place. Now I can go to sleep and enjoy life. Of course, we have to be there and still be out there and do the charities and help out in whatever way. But to take a step back and see what is the reality? What is the reality? And compared to even just a few years earlier. Okay. Just want to mention perhaps a few more examples quickly, and then I want to kind of wrap it up a little bit. Okay. One of the prophecies, and for some reason, I actually spoke to JLI, it was omitted in the actual textbook. It's another prophecy from Isaiah. If you want to look it up, it's Isaiah 65:20. And Isaiah tells us, there will no longer be from there a youth or an old man who will not fill his days, for the youth who is 100 years old shall die. In other words, life, the lifespan of humans are going to be a lot longer. They mentioned 100 years, and if someone dies when they're 100 years old, they'll say, oh, he's a young man, a young woman passed away, they're only 100 years old, right? Have we made progress?
That the oldest woman alive died?
Oh, I saw that yesterday, right?
Yeah.
So 116, yeah.
116,
I saw
wow.
that, yeah.
I just saw a picture on Facebook from one of my colleagues in, I don't remember where.
Was she the oldest person in the United States or in?
Oh, I don't know. I'm hearing this now for the first time. I saw today,
I'm
so
not sure they don't know about Akron, but I think they're saying from who they know that she's the oldest person.
someone posted on Facebook, a older man praying in synagogue today, 103 years old. Pretty impressive. But what is the average life expectancy today in the United States? You look at this, you can see this on page 21. Right, today it's around, what is it, about 75, 80 years old, on average. Okay, now, just 100 years ago, 120 years ago, in 1900s, we're talking about an average of 35. It doubled, more than doubled in a century. Now, it's thanks to a lot of things, right? It's thanks to the amazing strides we have made in the field of medicine, right? If you look at figure 1.9 on page 22, you see Many of the I'm going over here. Because Moses lived to 120. Yeah. It's coming toward the reality, of course. Look, right? So with the eradication of smallpox and polio and rabies, all these things, and with all the other strides we made in medicine, we're healthier. And if we all listen to Gail and we only eat healthy, we'll even be healthier, right? We'll live longer. In fact, child mortality. Today, the sad truth with child mortality is that roughly 15,000 children under the age of 5 pass away every single day, which means that's roughly 30,000 parents every single day who are going to live with this pain for the rest of their lives because a child of theirs under the age of 5 passed away. Kamishka and I, we have a friend who lost a child a number of years ago, a few months old. It's devastating. It's painful. It's very difficult. The pain never leaves them. It's too much. It's too many. How does this compare to the 1850s, 150 years ago? How many children worldwide were dying under the age of 5? In the 1850s, around the world, at least where we have data from, over 50% of children, every other child on average, and this was throughout all European countries, 50% of children passed away either soon after birth or under the age of 5. Didn't have what we have today. I say this, we have 6 children. Every time we have a child, it's a blessing from God, it's a miracle. But part of the miracle is also the fact that we have these hospitals, we have the NICUs, we have what they do with children today, preemies, which it's hard to even imagine. Just 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, every year, it's like, who wants to go to give birth to a baby in a hospital that they haven't been updated any of their methods or any of their machines for the last year, 2 years? No one stepped foot there, because just in the last year, there's so many new things. The last 5, it's always changing and better and better and better, right? Today, in the United States, less than 1% of children pass away under the age of 5. And that is in most countries around the world. In some countries, it's up to 5%. And in some countries, I saw this in North Africa, some countries, or Central Africa, it's up to 10%. Up to 10%, which is way, way, way too high. Compare that to 150 years ago, where it was 50% around the world.
Actually, it says in the United States.
Is what?
Was saying, in the United States in 1850 was about 400 deaths per 1,000 children under 6.
We have a fact checker over here.
Keep it on your chest.
I asked her to come to that. Who mentioned this 100 years old? Okay, the Office of National Statistics in the UK. Do we trust the UK over here? Okay. Projects that we soon reach an average of 100-year lifespan. This is a prophecy. Again, how did the Jewish people think of this prophecy 100 years ago? 2,000 years ago? Life's 100 years old. This is a miracle. I'm not saying it's not a miracle, but we definitely made some progress. Okay, I mean, we could go on and on and on. Disabilities, right? We had the prophecy that the lame will be able to run like a deer and be able to speak and be able to, right? Just 2 days ago, we have over here in our community, Dr. Lance Turkish, an ophthalmologist, and he was here, and I told him over the weekend, he tells me that there was a conference for the ophthalmology conference in New Orleans. I said, Lance, tell me, What is the newest thing? What's the newest invention? What's the newest medicine? What's going on in the world of ophthalmology? And he says, the newest thing that they spoke about at this conference is that they have a transplant. Think of a transplant, a nerve from the foot that they transplant into the eye for people who have shingles or whatever. I didn't fully understand all the medical terms, that they have the outer part of the eye dries up, they can't see anymore. They have this transplant that they just started doing over the last few months, and it saves the eye from going blind. I mean, this is like, right? This is crazy. And obviously there's so many different things that we do today, all the surgeries and the LASIK and all the things that we do to save our eyesight. 100 years ago, we all went blind. Before glasses, I'm saying we didn't have any eyesight, right? And the same thing is with hearing, right? We have hearing aids, we have cochlear implants. We have today that they put these chip implanted beneath the brain for people who don't even have hearing nerves, fibers. So I'm saying what we do today to be able to hear, to be able to speak, to be able to see, all these things, right? And it's something that just happened over the last 20, 30, 40 years, right? Wars. We spoke about there will be no more wars. Yes, there are wars going on. We had the two world wars, but at the same time, we also had what the UN Charter, right, declares all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. It's a whole new reality. Think of Alexander the Great. If he was living today, where would he be? Behind bars. The great conquerors, yeah, conquer the world. We look down at that today. We don't like violence. We don't like war. Yeah, it's a necessary evil. Sometimes we have to do it. But for the most part, we want to have peace. We all sanction peace. We understand when something goes wrong. War is it's not the fact of life, right? Spoke about weapons. Today, we have less weapons. Everyone's against even the nuclear arsenal. We all understand this is a terrible thing. All countries pretty much understand this is not a good thing. It's a negative thing. We try to dismantle it. We use so many things that were initially invented for destruction, for war, for fighting, for killing. Today, they are used in the medical field. They're used to heal. They're used to help provide other people with help from starvation, from illnesses, whatever it is, right? It's a whole new era. It's a whole new era. And this is all, again, in the last 30, 20, 30, 40 years. So why am I telling you all this? We're talking about Mashiach. And I said, I want to take the belief out of this for a moment. What is this? What is it? We call it science. Okay. We call it technology. We call it medicine. We call it human invention. And it's true. That's what it is. It is technology, it is science, it is human invention. That is the truth. But at the same time, we have to ask ourselves, where was this knowledge all these years? Thousands of years. If you take a person who lived 2,000 years ago, pick him up, you put him down in the year 1700, 1750, 1800. Would he or she recognize the world around them? Pretty much. I think they would. Pretty much. If you take a person from the 1700 to 1800 and you place him down or her down in 2020, you know what they're going to say? Mashiach has arrived. It's a different reality.
Yes.
Someone mentioned a movie to me recently. Haven't watched it, but the concept is intriguing. It's called An American Pickle. Have you heard of it?
Yeah.
I think the storyline is there's this old Jew from ancient Europe who falls into a pickle barrel 100 years ago. And they survive. And they wake up 100 years later, and they're living 100 years later, and they're trying to interact with his grandson. And that's the comedy, that's the story. It's like 100 years goes by, it's a total different reality. Just think about the life before electricity, before internet, before phone, before planes, before cars, before trains, everything was different. We had here, what was it, a few months ago? Not a few months, almost a year ago, when we had the hurricane over here. We lost power for like a day, 2 days. We didn't know what to do. What, just candles? What, and then it turns dark and then we just go to sleep? Really? Like, what do you mean? I want to watch a movie. I want to watch a play. I need to do things at night, right?
It's like Shabbos.
It was worse than Shabbos, because Shabbos you could have light. Here we had no light, right? It's like a new normal. For us, we call it progress. What else should we call it? This is life. It's a new normal. But we have to take a step back and think, what is it? Why suddenly? Thousands of years, they invented little. Maybe they had sharper knives. They had better bow and arrows. But little changed. And within a short period of 150 years, suddenly there's this like massive, massive change. So think about that. And think how it correlates with the prophecies of the Messianic era. And the truth is, this was all predicted. What do I mean by this? I'm sure many of you heard of the Zohar. The Zohar is the book of Kabbalah, written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Actually, his yard site, his day of passing, is coming up next week on Lag BaOmer. The Zohar, the book of Kabbalah. The Zohar tells us something fascinating. I mentioned previously about the Messianic era being compared to Shabbos, the seventh day of the week. So he says actually that we know the Torah says that the world is 5,782 years old. So if you split, you break down the years of the world's existence to 7 millennia, 7,000 years. So the first, from the creation to Abraham, and Abraham, whatever, right? 1,000, the second 1,000, the third 1,000, the 6,000, then the 7th millennia. The 7th millennia is the era of Mashiach. And he says that in the 6th millennia, okay, in the 600 year of the 6th millennia, the Zohar tells us, which was written 2,000 years ago, there will be a expression of a wealth of knowledge in the world. And this wealth of knowledge is it's a taste of the knowledge of the Messianic era. Okay? Now, on the Hebrew calendar, we are now in the year 5782, which means we are 782 years into the 6th millennium. 182 years ago was the beginning of the 600 year of the 6th millennium. When did we have all this knowledge? When was the first vaccine administered? When did we have technology? When did we have electricity, the light bulb, the cars? It's all in the last 150 or 200 years. This is what it is. The Zohar tells us this. We have to take a step and think, like we said earlier, we have to open up our eyes. Look at what's happening around us. For 2,000 years since the prophecies, it made no sense. It made zero sense. And suddenly, within a short 100 years, there's this vast knowledge and there's like a whole different reality. It became the new normal, but is it really the new normal? Or is it something of a bigger picture? Something else is happening over here. You know, there's a prophecy, perhaps you heard of this before, that when Mashiach comes, that God is going to take all the Jewish people to Israel on eagle's wings. Have you heard that before? On eagle's wings. What does that mean? or sitting on an eagle. I don't know what it means. I'm not coming to say if it means literally or not. I don't know. But before we had airplanes, how do we understand the idea of flying to Israel? Human beings don't fly. Birds fly. We can't fly. But now the concept of flying is a reality. Of course we fly, right? We fly 7 times a day, right? We fly here, fly there, we have business. We're flying all the time. You know, the Yemenites, for those who know the history of the Yemenite Jews that were rescued by the Mossad, by Israel, out of Yemen and brought to Israel. So they were living very, very impoverished lives, and they were all snuck out of the cities, and they were brought to some the desert or something, right, in the middle of nowhere. And then Israel came with a plane and picked them up and took them to Israel. The Yemenite Jews never saw a plane before. They literally thought that this was the prophecy, the fulfillment of the prophecy that we will go to Israel on eagle's wings. Right? We refer to a plane as an eagle, right? What is it? It's an eagle, right? The concept is realistic. Someone told me that there is a letter from Maimonides. I have not been able to find it. But Maimonides writes in a letter somewhere that one of his issues, so to say, he has a hard time wrapping his head around the one concept of Mashiach is that how is it possible that suddenly, within a moment's notice, all Jews from around the world, from London, from Paris, from Spain, from Germany, from North Africa, from Israel, from Asia, everyone is going to be notified and they're going to know that Mashiach is here. How's it possible? Maimonides couldn't understand, not that he didn't believe in it, but how is it possible? How is it going to play out? He didn't know, he couldn't understand it. Do you understand it? I understand it. It'll be in the newspaper, it'll be online, it'll be on Facebook, it'll be on Twitter, it'll be, right? We have an issue of spreading information. We have no issue. These ideas, these concepts are here to guide us, to make this idea of Mashiach more of a reality. You know, unfortunately, obviously, we are still in a pandemic. And one thing we can learn from this pandemic is that something so sudden changes our whole reality. We all could reminisce a year ago, right? This news, within a short moment, right? Once it started hitting the shores of America, within a day or two, it was like done, right? Schools are closing, offices are closing. This is, and before you know it, we're home, we're quarantined for a year. We couldn't predict it, especially not a week ago, a week before, a month before, 3 months before. Who predicted that we're going to be locked in our homes for a year? It was so sudden, but it happened. That's Mashiach. It could happen in a moment's notice. And I want to conclude with one last prophecy. And we mentioned this in Maimonides about the wealth of knowledge of Torah that's going to be when Mashiach comes. Today, each and every one of us has more access to the Torah, to the study of Torah, and to the fulfillment of a mitzvah, more than the sages of the Talmud, more than the great sages throughout the generations. I could walk in the streets with the entire Torah in any language, in any format. I want to read it, I want to hear it, I want to watch it for advanced, for beginners, for elderly, for younger. It's all there. And a little device to hold on one finger. Right? We all have it. It's wherever we go. It happens so fast. Just a generation ago, to buy a book was a big deal. My grandfather tells me that when he was in a yeshiva, the yeshiva boys had one book to study from. They would all share the same book. Today, who buys books? I go online. I read everything online. I have a brother in Toronto. a dear brother. I love my brother. And I was just there for Pesach. He has a beautiful library, a really nice library. He set it nicely, many, many bookshelves. He studies Torah a lot. I'm taller than him. I look up to him. My older brother. And he tells me, so I asked him, I was there, I said, Label, your bookshelves are full to capacity. Like, what are you gonna do when you buy another book? He says, oh, he stopped buying books. He said, now he studies online. He has this program that has, I think, like 200,000 Torah books. That's all he does. He has a search engine. He has his own library on his computer. Doesn't buy any more books. There is a man in California, a big philanthropist. Him and his brother, I think the twins, they are extremely successful businessmen. And thank God they really share their wealth. I mean, they're very philanthropic. They give a lot of charity. His name is Yehuda Rechnitz. Rechnitz, that's his name. Very famous in the Jewish world because he gives to a lot of Jewish institutions. And because so many people come to him and ask him for sponsorship, for donations, for help, he actually set up a time, I'm not sure, once a week, twice a week, where he sits in the evening, and this is the time, if you want to come, he sets a time, come, you have a minute, a few minutes with him, and he's very generous to the people who come by. But unfortunately, with every good thing, people take advantage. People take advantage. Now, there are many phonies. People come and they're coming with asking for money, and they don't really need. So, of course, we try to give. We always, we try to be non-judgmental, but we always look out for these issues. He says one day, he said this publicly, so I'm comfortable sharing it. He says one day he was in shul in the synagogue praying, and he sees a man who comes. He wasn't familiar with him, didn't recognize him, and he looked fishy. He looked suspicious. He was kind of keeping an eye on him. And he watches him. He watches him take a prayer book in Hebrew, fully Hebrew. And he's looking to see how he prays. And he notices that he's holding the book upside down. And he's praying, or making as if he's praying. And right away he says, this guy's a phony. He doesn't read Hebrew. He's making as if, can't even hold the book up straight. And he says, he's probably going to come to my house. I know this guy. He's probably going to come to my house. And lo and behold, that evening, knock on the door. Who is it? It's this man. And he's ready to get excited. Okay, I'm gonna put this guy in his place, right? He comes in. He says, Mister, tell me, I want you to read the Shema. Say the Shema. Any Jew knows the Shema Yisrael. So he rattles off, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. He was kind of surprised. Continue, right? He reads a different prayer. This is prayer. He knows his prayers. So he calls in someone to bring a sitter. He says, please read some of the prayers to me. And the guy takes the prayer book, turns it upside down, and he starts to read. And Mr. Rechner says, tell me, you got to explain this to me. What's going on over here? So listen, I'm Yemenite. When we were children in Yemen, in our class, we had one prayer book. Our teacher had a prayer book in front of him. We all sat around the table and we learned how to read from whichever angle we saw the prayer book. I was sitting right in front of my teacher. So till today, I read upside down. Now, obviously, it's a very important lesson in being non-judgmental. The point is, people didn't have prayer books. People didn't have the basics. Today, how many books do you want? 100 books, 50 books? It's all available. It's available. So today, not just like Renee mentioned earlier, it's not just the materialistic things that we have, even the spiritual things that we need, the opportunities to study Torah, wherever we are. Look, we have Janet and Randy and Cece and Mike. They're joining us on Zoom for wherever they are. For all they know it, they're in Australia. For all they know it, they're in an island off Greece. I don't know where they are, right? They can be wherever we have Wi-Fi. And we're able to study Torah, we're able to join together, we're able to give classes, we're able to do whatever we want, right? It's accessible. We could go to Chabad.org, #1 website, highly recommended. And we can study whatever we want. We can have a chavrusa, a study partner, we can watch videos, we can listen to audio, we can read articles. There's no end to the study. All the way from Uptown, Janet Gross is joining us, right? Beautiful. Doing a mitzvah. You know, on Sukkot, for example, we have the mitzvah, we shake the 4 species, right? The love, the etrog, the willow, and the myrtle. We put them together, we say a blessing. You know, 100 years ago, it was very difficult to get a hold of one of these things, to make it kosher. Today, Amazon.com, you have it at your doorstep the next day. We have a nicer and a more kosher lulav set than perhaps the greatest sages 300 years ago in Russia. So we are living in a time where we are able to fulfill the Torah from a religious standpoint as well, and study Torah more than our grandparents and great-grandparents were able to do. So again, we're living in a time where I'm not saying there's no issue and other issues. I'm not saying we're not living in the Mashiach times. There's a lot we could complain a lot, right? It's like the analogy with you have a board, right? You have a board. There's 100 tiles on the board. There's 1 tile missing. When you look at that board, what are you going to see? What are you going to notice? The missing tile. But there are 99 tiles that are in place. You notice the missing tile. So, with this information, I'm going to leave you. And we'll, for those of you who have not signed up for the entire course, I encourage you to sign up for the rest of the 6 weeks. Either go online or let me know. Continue next week. Next week, we're going to focus on the more spiritual aspect of Mashiach. Take this information and think about it, process it. Process the information, Angela, how in the last number of years have we made great progress with these specific prophecies, and what does that mean to me in my belief in Mashiach? Is it a reality or is it unrealistic? And I'll give you some homework. Think about it throughout the week. And God willing, we look forward to continuing our conversation about Mashiach, learning more about Mashiach, learning about how Mashiach is really not just about the physical prophecy and what's going to happen. It's also a spiritual journey. It's actually the mission. It's the fulfillment of the purpose of the world, a whole new understanding, deeper layer to Mashiach. We will discuss that next week. Thank you all for joining. If you have any questions, whether in person or here on Zoom, please, I'm here as long as you keep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.